call this meeting to order. Our moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance will be led by Mr. McMillan.
Please face the flag, please. Salute. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for our quarterly work session. Wanted to remind you that our next work session will be next Wednesday, February 3rd, with the regular session to follow on Wednesday, February 10th. And both of those meetings will be held in this boardroom at 5 p.m. The Naming Facilities Committee meeting that was formerly scheduled for Monday, January 25th has been postponed to this Friday, January 29th at 2 p.m. The Tennessee School Boards Association Legislative and Legal Institute is being held at the Doubletree, Nashville, downtown on February 15th and 16th, and several board members will be in attendance. Also, board members, I wanted just to let you know that Commission has created the Redistricting Committee, and this will take the census information, and the committee will analyze current districts and make changes based on the populations as needed. So the committee will consist of the 11 commissioners, the Board of Education chair, and the election commissioner. So that we will not have the information for that committee until it'll probably be a few weeks. But the big thing will be is that you guys may get questions about, the public may confuse that with rezoning. So we'll ask the superintendent to send some information out as we get closer, so we can make sure that people aren't confused about redistricting and that it's not actually rezoning. Okay. Any questions on that? Go ahead, Ms. Satterfield.
I do, but it can wait because we'll have discussion. But will it? So the redistricting will affect the amount of, like, our districts as board members, though, right?
Correct. So,
but not the kids' schools.
Correct.
Okay.
So, commission our districts as board members line up with our commissioners' districts. So, and we'll as we get further information, you'll be aware of it, and you can always provide input as you need to. So anyway, just wanted to make sure that you guys are aware of that. Do we have any changes to this agenda? Okay, do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion by Ms. Satterfield, a second by Mr. Watson. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, and I'd like to refer to Mr. Thomas for the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. A few updates this evening for you. I'd like to begin by highlighting two exciting events that are coming up next month. The first is a brand new fundraiser called Skates and Plates, which is being hosted by the Partners in Education Foundation and will benefit Knox County schools. This virtual fundraiser, will be held at 11:30 a.m. on Thursday, February 18th. In future years, we're planning to host this event on the ice at the Knoxville Coliseum. Of course, we can't do that this year, but we're very excited that players from the Knoxville Ice Bears hockey team will be making a virtual appearance. Community partners who are interested in hosting a table can visit skatesandplates.swell.gives to sign up, and I look forward to being part of this exciting event this year. I also want to remind everyone that our annual Teacher of the Year celebration will be held on Tuesday, February 23rd at 6 p.m. This celebration will also be held virtually. Again, I'm very excited to announce that every KCS teacher will be invited to participate this year. In such a challenging year, each of our teachers has gone above and beyond the call of duty. I cannot think of a better time to open this event to our entire teaching staff. And my hope is that this event will help our educators understand how much we do appreciate them and what they do every day. I'm also very excited that John Maxwell will be our guest speaker at the Teacher of the Year celebration. Mr. Maxwell is a leadership expert and is the best-selling author of more than 100 books, and I think our attendees will find him inspiring. And this week is School Board Appreciation Week in the state of Tennessee. So we appreciate you so much, and we're trying to show our appreciation each day this week to you. So we wanted to celebrate with you and for you and just appreciate all of you so much for what you do. I can only imagine how challenging it is to serve on the Board of Education, and this year's been particularly difficult as we have wrestled with so many related obstacles, I guess, related to COVID-19. So been a difficult year for everyone, and I know for you too, with all the challenges. Our district's ability to offer both in-person and virtual instruction for nearly 60,000 students is a testament to the board's leadership and their commitment to finding the best solution for students. So on behalf of our students, families, and employees, I want to thank each of our board members for their service, and I hope that members of our community will take a moment to thank them this week. And hopefully tomorrow's Thursday, day after is Friday, maybe there'll be another surprise come your way, maybe. So be on the lookout. So thank you so much, Madam Chair, and that concludes my report for this evening.
Thank you, Superintendent Thomas. We appreciate all the nice little treats this week. Thank you so much. Very nice. Okay, we will turn to our first agenda item, and I would like to introduce Human Resources Executive Director Scott Bolton, and this is as a follow-up conversation to the conversation we had around superintendent's evaluation at our September workshop. And so I'm going to just go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Bolton, and he can get us started.
Madam Chair, board members, thank you for this opportunity to kind of walk you through the evaluation process this year. Just to kind of follow up where we talked about and what we talked about in the spring, and the conversation about the current model that we have. There we go. So what you should see is something similar that the metrics. Now I have pulled out those metrics that can be scored. These are reflective of the metrics that we've had problems with scoring over the last couple of iterations of the superintendent evaluation. And as you know, timing is an issue. And student achievement data has been an issue. And so if you look at this document, and it is a similar document that I presented in the fall, but you'll see based on that document the dates when those accountability measures that could be implemented into the model are available for us to use. So in looking at typically, as we look at the timing for the superintendent evaluation, the standard is prior to the July meeting or as soon as reasonably possible. I believe I'm saying that. As soon as practically possible, I think, is the terminology that we're using. If we followed on prior to the July meeting, then we would continue for a third year having NAs in those categories. And having a conversation with Mr. Dupler about the process, a suggested timeline, an ideal timeline, if we looked that would satisfy all of these, would certainly be November. You'll see that in the second document that I included. Ideally, in the future, and thinking about evaluations, that would be the ideal timeline. You never have to worry about the availability of data. You never have to worry about the timing of elections throwing off the superintendent evaluations because that becomes an issue when it's in an election year. So ideally, the timing of a superintendent evaluation would take place in January. Now, in light of all of that, this year, Gary and I engaged in a conversation about the availability of this data and not having to score for a third year those categories in A. It could be postponed until November to score the evaluation of the superintendent as soon as or practically possible, because all data will be in and the scoring would be complete if the evaluation if it was the pleasure of the board, for the evaluation to be completed in November rather than being completed in July. And so that is essentially the premise of what I have to present to you is kind of a proposal for consideration to think about postponing the evaluation until November. And as you know, last year when we took up the evaluation process, student achievement data would not have been available given that it was the pandemic. So whether we completed the evaluation in July or completed the evaluation in November, it would have been the same either way. But this year, a complete evaluation could be completed in November without any issues, as I understand it. So I'd be happy to take any questions if anybody has any questions.
Okay, Mr. Bolton, one question. So when you're saying it could be completed in November, is that, and then we would discuss it at the end of January, or are you saying discuss it in November?
I'm saying,
Or we could do really either?
right, complete the full evaluation in November. It would take place in probably a special called board meeting in November.
Okay.
We would just back up. If you look at the timelines of how I've suggested for a January ideal date, you back up those same times and those same timelines for that evaluation to take place in November. All data we will have in October. So we could go through that process in November.
Okay. All right. Mr. Dupler, would you like to add something to that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, Mr. Bolton came to me and he came to me with this proposal and we took a look at it and he was thinking January, but after looking at the applicable board policy and at the superintendent's contract, the board would not want to do it in January because that would essentially be in the next year because an evaluation has to be done annually. So that's when we came up with, well, you're probably better off going, late in the year, which would be ideally November, but could be December, depending upon how the numbers fall and things like that. So that's where we came up, with this. I mean, but this is a proposal, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. Ms. Babb?
And I guess thinking about it, I mean, data-wise, I like the fact of November, but then we run into the every other year on elections. We would have, I mean, sometimes there's hardly any new board members, but you could have a huge changeover of board members of a board that really does not have any experience with the superintendent trying to evaluate them. So it's like a catch-22. Like we can't kind of win either way we do it because, I mean, I do like the fact of having the data. That's, I'm one of the ones that had problems with the lack of information that we had. And I guess it is more of an every other year problem too on the elections. But I just think that's something else we just need to bring into consideration.
Okay, Mr. Dupler.
I can address that as well. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Babb. So legally, the superintendent's evaluation has to be done either 45 days before the election or 30 days after the election, which obviously doesn't apply this year, but would next year. Yeah.
Okay, in thinking about that, I'm wondering if this would work. And I know it. In this conversation, we've talked about the fact that sometimes in the past, the board has chosen to do a different month if it is an election year. So this year, since we don't have that issue, perhaps we could do it in November 2021. But then the next year, you could not. In 2022, you couldn't. But you couldn't then go into 2023 because then you're in a different year. Is that correct?
Well, you can do it 30 days after the election, but you're having, if there's a huge turnover on the board, you're having board members that literally are evaluating a superintendent they really don't have much experience with. So that's the only issue I see with it.
So you could do November, December timeframe, but you just would have brand new board members.
Inexperienced
Right.
school board members.
Mr. Watson?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So I want to make sure I'm clear on this. So in the election years, it has to be done within 30 days or prior to 45?
Yeah, it has to be done prior to 45 days before the election or after 30 days after. So, I mean, there's a window, 45, before and 30 days after. It can't be done in that
Can't be done
timeframe.
within that window. Okay.
Yeah.
So is there a possibility, I'm not saying that I necessarily love this, I'm trying to see what the options are. Is there a possibility for us to, as the board, if it's a board policy and not being dictated by law, can we suspend that policy for this year and move it to an ideal timeframe of January 2022?
So that's an interesting question. So the state law is the timeframe, but I believe what you're saying is
Earlier, you had referenced policies says that you have to do it annually.
It's the superintendent's contract, if I'm not mistaken.
right. You've got the superintendent's contract. Policy also calls for annually.
Right.
So, but it doesn't specify whether that's school year or calendar year. It just says annually. So there's some room to wiggle there, but I mean, state law, I mean, you wouldn't be able to get around. Policy, you may be able to tweak some.
And the state law issue is only the election piece of that, or what's the state law issue?
Well, the state law does say annually as well, but again, it doesn't specify.
What they mean by annually.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
So seems like we always have the same conversation, and we're always right back to where we started. So, Mr. McMillan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is just a thought. I don't know how receptive the board would be, but I think that if we move it back and forth, 1 year it's in 1 month, and sometime later it's in January, it would not only be confusing for maybe school personnel, but the public as well, ones that care and or were interested, I should say. You can have it, since the August election is what we're talking about. You could have it beginning sometime in the second week in October. Could you not, Mr. Duper? As far as starting working on the evaluation, and then do it, wind it up, and have your special meeting in November. That would give you basically 50 days plus to work on it.
Sure. You could, I mean, like you said, Mr. McMillan, you could start it. I mean, you wouldn't have your full information until
No.
probably later in October, but yeah, by all means, you could start it.
But you could get the things done that, that you already knew about, with the exception of the data. And then that would seem more logical to me, just setting it something like that. Do it, get it out of the way, probably before the holidays begin. Thank you.
Ms. Babb?
I agree with Mr. McMillan that I don't like us switching back and forth every year. I mean, I think you do need to have some consistency on when it is. And my big thing is looking at when the data is ready. I mean, I think that's the whole point of us changing it. If we change it, is to have all the data. So, I think we need to look at that. If it's can be ready end of October, great. But if we think it's more like 1st of November, then I think 1st of November would be, we need to do it when the data is ready, because that would be the only reason we're really moving this instrument anyway.
Correct. So what if we looked at doing this? Because the other big issue that we've talked about is asking Mr. Bolton to come to one of our work sessions and just walk through the evaluation with all of us prior to filling it out to make sure that everybody's on the same page. So what if we looked at doing that at our quarterly work session, which is on September 29th, and then we would have basically the month of October to complete those, and then have the called meeting in November to review the evaluation. Would that be appropriate?
That works perfect with me. I mean,
Okay.
as long as it's a pleasure of the board.
I'm sorry, Ms. Satterfield.
Yes, I just want to lift up a perspective that the data, to what Board Member Babs mentioned, that is like the a catch-22, but I feel like the data might just is the priority. If we do have a completely new board, if the rubric is tight and the data is the data, and the data says that superintendent is great or superintendent is bad, then the new school board member should be able to have that level of neutral to look at the data to say yes or no. So I think we should focus on having a tight rubric versus trying to fix the dates, and make sure that rubric is evaluating him to the truest, or whoever it may be, to the truest sense.
Okay, I'm not sure who was first.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mr. Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So because I wasn't on the board and I haven't reviewed the superintendent's contract, can you explain specifically what it is about the contract that said it would have to be done this calendar year and not to January?
Sure. I don't have the contract in front. Do you have the contract? Great, thank you.
Look at them.
My recollection is, as Mr. Bolton's, that it has to be done as soon as practicable. Right, I got it. Thank you. So the exact language is beginning in 2018, the evaluation shall take place prior to the board's regular July meeting of each year, or as soon thereafter as practicable. So that's what's kind of tripping the board up right now, is because that's written into the contract. But as Mr. Bolton indicated, the soon thereafter as practicable would allow this board to delay that once this board has that objective data.
Yeah, I appreciate, Mr. Bolton, how you started the conversation this evening. You talked about the ideal time. And I think if there's a way for us to, as a board, to move it to January where we have the data, it doesn't impact new board members as much in terms of being able to do it in the long term. And I know it means pushing it 2 months, and I know that flips a calendar year when we do that. But if there's a way to do that, and I know there's policy against it, but I don't know if we can temporarily suspend the policy. And it sounds like the contract and both state law are kind of fuzzy on the issue. Again, I don't know if there's a way to do it, Mr. Dukler, but I think that's what I would advocate for, is try to get to in a rhythm where this board isn't having this conversation 2 or 3 years from now, and people are like, oh, this is in the sweet spot. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, Mr. McMillan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Dupler, does state law actually say that the superintendent shall be evaluated annually?
Mr. Dupler.
Yes, but that's basically all it says. I mean, it doesn't say how.
Well,
it doesn't
is
say
state law. If it says the superintendent will be evaluated annually, that means to me that you should evaluate him sometime during the year, not skip and pick and choose. Now, I misspoke, I think, a while ago when I said October, because the local election is held the first week in August. So theoretically, you said 30 days after. We could start anytime beginning with the second week in September. And if we didn't do the final analysis, I guess, until mid-November or whenever in November, I would think that was ample time for anyone to get even a new board member. And if they're uncomfortable with it, why, there's nothing that says that you absolutely have to vote. To my knowledge, would that not be correct, Mr. Dupler?
Well,
Go ahead, Mr.
Well, yes or no?
thank you, Madam Chair. Well, yeah, I mean, again, there's not much guidance from the state, Mr. McMillan. I mean, it's what I've told you is basically the guidance, and yeah, there's no penalty for a board member abstaining. I mean, is that your question?
That's what I wanted to know.
Right.
I mean, if we had, say, 2 new board members and they chose, or one of them chose not to render a vote, why there wouldn't be anything wrong with that. Majority of the board would rule, assuming that 5 or more voted one way or another. Correct?
Right, there's nothing legal that says you can't do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Owen, do you have your mic down?
I do, Madam Chair.
Okay, go right
Thank you.
ahead.
I'm going to go a little different direction. So what I'm hearing are concerns about having new board members have to do an evaluation that they were not a part of, but also having the data in time, as well as the contract that says it has to be done in July. So what if we did it in July with whatever board members were there in July, with all the parts that are available, and then REA fill in the data when it becomes available, so that the subjective part would be completed by the board members in July, and then the objective part would be completed by REA whenever that was available, October, November.
But that doesn't work with the election, because the election, if it's the first week of August, would take you 45 days back to,
June, July,
June.
whenever we normally do, is what I was
okay,
intending.
okay.
So that it would be done as normal, and then when the data became available, it would just be plugged in to complete that whole process.
I want to speak again, please.
Sure, Mr. McMillan.
I think we're trying to make this too complicated. Let's assume that there are new board members that come on. Then if you follow your scenario, it would probably have to be done in June in order to meet the 45-day requirement. Then you have a new board member or members that come in, let's just say for argument's sake, that we change superintendents. Then they would come in and not have any opportunity for a year to voice their concerns about whoever the superintendent was. You see what I'm saying? I mean, do you think that would be fair to new board members coming in to not have the opportunity to vote on whoever the existing superintendent was, because the board member prior to them had voted before they came on? I didn't do a very good job of explaining it, but I think you should be able to see what I'm talking about. Would you want that done to you if you were the new board member coming in? I think it's much better to do it like I said, and then you have the option. But you always have the choice of voting yay or nay, or just abstaining if you do it from September to November. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McMillan. Ms. Owen, did you have any follow-up?
Yes, you're talking about voting on the superintendent's contract? Is that what you mean? So I think that would be a question of whether that would be necessarily tied to that year's evaluation, because
Right,
it's
that's
usually,
two different conversations.
They are, but
because aren't we usually a couple of years out on that? It's not an immediate action.
Right. Typically, the evaluation will be separate from the contract. It could happen that it's the same timing, but not necessarily.
you're right about that, but I still just think, that's just my opinion, but I think you're trying to,
Okay.
complicate matters.
Yeah, I
I
think,
just think it would be better to
Okay.
set it and go.
I know what my recommendation is going to be, but let's go ahead and have a couple more comments from Ms. Christie. She hasn't gotten to speak.
Yeah, I agree with what Ms. Satterfield said. I mean, my problem's more with the evaluation itself. I think if we have a good evaluation and we have the data, that a new person should be able to navigate through it. And let's face it, if you are running for school board, I would hope that you're somewhat engaged and know a little bit about what's going on in the district prior to being sworn in anyway. But I'm fine with anything from November to January. But I do think that we need to have that to, it does bother me doing the evaluation with so many NAs listed in the metrics.
Mr. Bolton?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I looked at that. I did a little bit of did a little bit of research about the last time that we did a new evaluation model. There was a prior model that was approved in 2015, and then on June 13th of 2018, there was a committee that was formed to take on this evaluation model. They met a total of about 6 times over a period of about 10 months for that evaluation to be approved. It was approved in April of 2019. Subsequently, it was used 2 months later to evaluate the superintendent. As I read the board policy in terms of the evaluation of the superintendent, the timing of that valuation, it almost seems like if that was a matter that the board would want to take on about looking at a new evaluation document, I'm thinking best case scenario, that document could be used in 2023, maybe in 2022, because as I read the evaluation policy, and Mr. Dupler may have to correct me on this, but the way I understand it is the superintendent has to be aware of the expectations in that document prior to him being evaluated by that document. So I think that the earliest that could happen, if we look at what's happened in the past, a committee is formed, 10 months later, a new evaluation is adopted, and then that evaluation could be used, but it has to be prior to that particular year. So I just wanted to throw that in if that's the pleasure of the board.
Thank you, Mr. Bolton. Ms. Babb, and then we'll go to Ms. Owen.
Yeah, and this is my last comment. I just would prefer us to go with the fall. I think once we've had the data, I mean, my big issue is with lack of data, as several other people have said. So I think the fall, my issue with waiting till January is, I do think it's getting into a year and a half without an evaluation, and I just feel like that's too long. I mean, I know it's a 1-year cycle that it would be a problem. So at least for this next year, I would push for October, November, as soon as the data is available for us to use.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Babb. Ms. Owen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make sure all board members know that when that committee was working, there was an effort to not add anything new to that evaluation so that the superintendent would have plenty of knowledge of what was going to be in it. So that was part of it, so that it wasn't a completely new evaluation. It was just consolidating the repetitive questions and working out some really confusing wording that was in there.
Yes, thank you for making that clarification, because that's the case. There was nothing new added to the evaluation from the previous evaluation, which is why, and it was used so quickly after. Okay. Mr. Dupler, did you have one more comment?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to make one clarification. In the past, this board has treated the evaluation and contract negotiations as at least, coinciding. I mean, we realize they're not the same thing, but that was the whole reason for the language in the contract itself right now is, in fact, that 45 and 30-day window does deal with, in the law, with contracts, with the contract with the superintendent. You cannot enter into or extend the superintendent's contract within that time frame. So that's, just wanted to clarify. I mean, you all realize it's not the exact same thing, but they are intertwined, and that's why it's written that way in the contract.
Thank you, Mr. Dupler. So I would propose that we do a November evaluation, that we, on September 29th at our work session, that Mr. Bolton would come, go through the evaluation tool with us. We would have the month of October to prepare the evaluation, and then do a called meeting in November. Is everybody in agreement with that? Okay, all right, good. I think that's good. And then new board members would have a couple of months that they would have been here. So hopefully, and as Ms. Christie said, hopefully they're paying attention already and have some opinions anyway. So we would hope so. We would hope so. Good point. So, okay, that's great. Thank you so much, Mr. Bolton. We appreciate you leading us through that conversation. Okay, and now I am happy to welcome our Curriculum and Instruction Executive Director, Shannon Jackson, and she's going to walk us through academics and bring us up to speed. So thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, Superintendent. I'm excited to be here today. There has been a lot happening in the last week with legislation, and I was asked to address a couple of key aspects with that. So this presentation is really going to focus on some of what we're hearing about learning loss and our recovery plans, how we have been thinking about assessment and using that, and then getting into some reading instruction. I know there's been some legislation around that. I have the reading department with me with a couple of teachers to talk about our approach to reading and how the new legislation impacts us, and they will also be able to give you some classroom examples. So we have had an ongoing response to COVID-19 since March 13th of last year. So that is the day that we were closed for spring break, and we started realizing what was happening and thinking through what this would mean for students. So when we first closed, my department, we thought we would be reopening. We started working with teachers to figure out what part of the content students were missing during that closure so that we could be prepared to help teachers with that when we returned. That's been an ongoing conversation. So what we ended up doing with that when we were closed was to really work with our teachers on, from that March 13th closure until May, what content did we miss in those different grade levels. And then from that, we started looking into the research. We have never experienced a long-term closure like this before, but there are other school systems that have. So we started going into the research, and the first place we looked, John Hattie had written about the closure based on the Christchurch earthquake in 2011. And so we were able to look at their response to that long-term closure and how they measured students who remained in the school district, came back to the school district, and what were successful strategies for them. We also have a closer example with Katrina in New Orleans. That was an August event, and those students were out of school for some of them up to a year. So we were able to look at the students, not the students who left New Orleans and came back, but the students who remained in New Orleans and missed the significant portion of the school year. And we started to build our model off of that. As we started getting into this research, we realized that a lot of the other big districts were looking at that as well. We connected with several across the country around how they were thinking about this. A couple of things that I want to make sure people are clear on are two terms that started to emerge in that research. Remediation, which is where we are identifying where students are missing content and filling those gaps. We can't live in remediation because, as you can see, the graph there is showing what we call the Matthew effect. If we put students in just remediation, it is the red line. They stay in that lower level, only getting the remediated learning, while their peers who are on grade level are continuing to accelerate and the gap widens. So we have to work also with acceleration, which is where we identify what they need for grade level content and make sure that we are giving them the point of help at the point of need so that they stay on grade level. What we didn't want was to start focusing so much on remediation that we had third graders who at the end of third grade were ready to start the second half of third grade. We wanted third graders who at the end of third grade were ready to start fourth grade. So we're remediating the missed content from second grade and giving them all of third grade so that they're ready for fourth grade. So our model for that started with really focusing on strong routines. We know that students who were out of school for a long period of time were losing that sense of routine and losing the connection with the adults in the school, which we thought was the most important thing for us to spend some time early on reconnecting, establishing routines, and reteaching students how to do school. Making sure that our teachers had a chance to look at that missed content in the previous grade levels and have some time to talk to each other so second grade teachers had a chance to talk to first grade teachers and a chance to talk to third grade teachers within their buildings. And we worked on some pre-assessments so that at the point of new learning, the teachers would have a pre-assessment that they could use to identify what skills might be missing so that they could remediate those skills and accelerate the learning and keep all students on grade level. So what we're looking at doing is preparing our students for the future while filling those holes that may have come about as a result of the closure. The other thing that we were learning from the research is that when students are in school, they have exposure to academic vocabulary in all their subjects. And that academic vocabulary is critical for their learning, their background knowledge, their content development, and that is why all of our subjects are so important, because they all build those concepts for our students. And so we wanted to put a strong emphasis on that academic vocabulary within our schools. So our key to this is in the planning, and that we needed to start with the standards and the content that students missed and the standards and the content they needed to regain. We needed to build routines around looking at our pre-assessment data. Fortunately, we've been a district that has PLC meetings and other collaborative meetings for teachers, so they're already looking at this data. It's already the way they operate. So we were able to say, you know, this is not new. It just may look a little different this year. And how do we intentionally work together and have some of those vertical conversations to help to understand what might be going on with some of our students. And then looking at those best strategies for filling those gaps. So that's where we started looking into the pedagogy, and we had to think a little differently this year because of moving to some virtual platforms. So looking at staying with high quality evidence-based instruction, and as students are performing on those assessments, understanding, is their performance based on it's a different strategy we're having to use because we're virtual, and so how do we think about filling and changing that strategy? Or are we seeing a gap that needs to be filled because of missing content? So our teachers have been really intentional about thinking through that and planning and working together. I will tell you, we had a professional development session on this on a Friday evening from 3:30 to 5:30, and I had 60 teachers who jumped in to think about just that very topic. So they're really they're feeling this, and they're working hard to make sure their students are ready. And then it's looking at those structures. So what tools do they need? How does the current context allow for them to deliver that instruction? And then what's the most efficient way for them to think about it? So what you see next is a sample of something that our math department put together. We have this for every subject, every grade. And this is how we started thinking in July and led our August in-service day around these kinds of documents. So when we collected from our teachers what content was missed at each grade level, we then created a document that we could share vertically so that a third grade teacher in math would know that the last thing that was missed in, or let me say a fourth grade teacher would know the last thing to be covered in third grade was lesson 24, and that's what students didn't get. Where should they pick up to cover that material, and where does it fit within their current set of standards? And then what materials are available to them to cover that material so that the students are able to recover that learning. We covered this as a district, and then we asked our teachers in that August in-service day to talk within their own schools to see if this was true for them in their school, because we know that they adjust as they need to based on the students they have in front of them. So this was a launching point for a conversation, and then they had these conversations within their school to make their plan. So our recommendations were, again, to start with those routines and reconnection, focus on acceleration so that they are ready for that next grade level, but remediate when necessary. We did recommend that they have 3 hours a day of reading and writing instruction, that they're constantly monitoring learning, and that they are prioritizing those grade level and higher texts in second grade and up so that they get that academic vocabulary. We also said that we really did not want anybody to short shrift the arts, world language, science, library, media, and social studies, because those are really important for building the background knowledge and that academic vocabulary and concept that helps them to learn in every subject. So before I move on to the reading part, are there any questions around our plan so far?
I don't see any questions.
Okay. So I am excited to present to you our supervisor of K-5 reading, Janet Sexton. She is going to talk to you about evidence-based instruction and classroom examples, specifically in reading. We've seen a lot of legislation going around about reading. We've been addressing some of the questions, and so we wanted to give you an overview of how Knox County approaches reading and how that fits in with the legislation. So I will turn it over to Janet.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson.
Madam Chair, board members, superintendent, there's been a lot of conversation around the Tennessee Literacy Success Act, and I've been asked to share how this might impact Knox County schools and how we align, and I appreciate the opportunity to do so this evening. We've all been told, or you've read, that the intent of this new act is, of course, to increase the number of students who are proficient in reading. But what does it mean to be a proficient reader, and how will this impact Knox County schools? You know, some people never give this question a lot of thought. Others, like me and probably you, have been asked this question more time than we could count. I'm going to ask you to think for just a minute about that reader who's struggling, and think about what it might be like to learn to read when it's difficult or it doesn't happen easily. In fact, reach back even further and think a little bit about your experience in learning to read. Most likely our experiences are fairly similar. There are going to be some variances for a multitude of reasons, but it's so easy to say that reading is, I recognize the words, I can decode them, I have language comprehension, and I understand it, I get it. But I'm going to share just a quick video here that talks about the complexity of learning to read by using the example of a reading rope and looking at the strands of the reading rope. And as you watch this short video, I want you to ask yourself, how strong is your reading rope? How do you know? And would you jump?
Imagine you're going bungee jumping. This is your third time, so you feel really good about going up to the highest platform. You get to the top and step up to the jump line. You take one last look at your bungee cord. That's when you see the portions of your cord are frayed. How do you feel about jumping now that you know your rope isn't strong? We know from the simple view of reading that readers need to be skilled in both word recognition and language comprehension, and that poor skills in either one creates a breakdown in reading abilities. To provide effective instruction, it's helpful to understand with a little more detail exactly where the reader needs help. So let's dive deeper into this equation and explore Hollis Scarborough's reading rope. The lower strand of the reading rope focuses on word recognition and includes 3 critical skills: phonological awareness, decoding, and sight recognition. These skills affect how we interact with printed text. Phonological awareness is our ability to work with speech sounds of language, like knowing that syllables make up words, handle, or recognizing the individual sounds within words. F. Decoding requires knowledge of the alphabetic principle, which is that sounds are represented by letters, and that not all spelling sound correspondences are direct one-to-one relationships. Like, you can spell the k sound several different ways. For example, the word cake has 2 spellings for this one sound. Sight recognition means that you see a familiar word and can instantly process it. Be aware that this doesn't mean only high-frequency words. To understand a reader struggling with the word recognition strand of the reading rope, try reading this out loud. That's pretty hard, right? We've artificially frayed your reading rope by removing the vowels, simulating a word recognition weakness. You might be able to get a few words here and there, but you can't decode accurately or efficiently. As these lower strand skills become stronger, they also become increasingly automatic. This frees up precious processing power for language comprehension, which takes us to the upper strand of the reading rope. The upper strand includes 5 key components: background knowledge, vocabulary, language structures, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge. Background knowledge. Think of this as all the built-up facts, concepts, and beliefs that you bring to the table when comprehending or learning from a text or situation. This knowledge acts as a solid base for new learning. Vocabulary. This includes both the breadth and depth of one's knowledge of the meaning of words in a text. Does the student understand that revolting can mean disgusting as well as rising up in rebellion? Language structures. This is how our language is organized. It's the relationships between the words and sentences in a text. Semantics and syntax play a role in knowing that it's more common to structure a sentence like, the barn owl hoots at night, than hoot at night, the barn owl does. Verbal reasoning. This is where the rubber hits the road with the ability to make inferences and understand metaphors, similes, and idioms. Literacy knowledge. This includes basic print concepts like we read from left to right and not right to left, as well as how text is organized for specific purposes. In the upper strands of the rope, readers become increasingly strategic and ultimately skillful over time. Let's look at the example paragraph again. Both upper and lower strand skills and abilities are necessary to read the words quickly and to read for meaning. Given that learning to read in alphabetically based orthographies entails visual recoding of language in the form of alphabetic characters representing speech sounds, and given that both phonological and visual coding are involved to some extent in language acquisition and language processing, we suggest these two abilities are most basic of the various cognitive abilities that underlie the ability to learn to read. Putting the vowels back in eliminates the simulated decoding deficit, making word recognition so much easier. But even knowing the words, you had to really lean on your language comprehension skills to follow the meaning, right? Skilled readers are strong in both language comprehension ability and word recognition skills. When both strands are woven tightly together, readers can jump into any text with confidence.
All right, so how strong is your reading rope? And how would you know? And do you feel like it's strong enough that you could take that leap that we're asking our students to do? If we take a closer look at this sentence, which, by the way, is considered extremely complex, we all can recognize the words, obviously. We can decode them, but is that really reading? Not quite, because we know there's so much more. We have to engage in language comprehension and to be able to understand what we've read. Now, when we read the sentence, the lower part of the rope is fairly solid. We know that sounds are represented by letters, so we can make that connection in order to decode. We also probably recognize many of these words automatically or by sight, and you're probably familiar with the vocabulary for many of these. But this sentence has 62 words, one sentence. But what about the upper part of the rope? Do we have the background knowledge, the vocabulary, understand language structures or syntax or the order of the words? Do we have the verbal reasoning that we could take this and make inferences or summarize or draw conclusions or retell it to someone else? Or do we have the literary knowledge to take a complex sentence like this and dissect it so that we could literally create a mental map in our mind of what we understand? Well, the two parts of the rope are obviously what often separates our struggling readers, those who perhaps might be labeled basic or below basic, from our proficient or advanced. Now, because of my background in reading, and this is my life and my work, I can comprehend and understand this and restate and summarize. But if this was a legal draft, I'd probably need some help from Mr. Dupler. Or if it was research on quantum physics, I would assure you that I would need someone to teach me explicitly, build some background, maybe open my understanding of vocabulary. I would need some help in literally taking it apart and looking at the clauses and so forth. And this is why, when we think about reading, it's hard to just say, well, it's just reading words and understanding what you say. It's extremely complex. Now, our goal, of course, for all students is that both the upper and lower strands of the reading rope become proficient and solidified. And by the way, the gist of this sentence is what we know, and that's recognizing the words, you can comprehend the sentence. Or you need both to be able to recognize the words and comprehend the sentence. So the question is, how does the Tennessee Literacy Success Act define foundational literacy skills? If you're like me, we've heard a lot of buzz and talk and a lot of things that weren't necessarily accurate. I took this verbatim from the bill. It means to be aware of phonemic awareness, which is sound, phonics, which is matching sounds to letters, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. So it's not just a phonics bill. The bill does require that the LEAs provide foundational literacy skills instruction to students in kindergarten through third grade. And they do expect that the foundational literacy skills must be the primary form of instructional programming for English language arts. So how does Knox County align with these requirements or expectations? One of the things that I wanted to share just briefly before we look at the two side by side, many of you are familiar with our year-long reading course that has been in play and sort of the anchor or foundation for all the professional development that we've been doing for about 7 or 8 years. If you look at the center paragraph here that's written in bolded print, it talks about everything in this course is anchored in the science of learning. It's devoted to instructional strategies supported by research like the reading rope that we just saw. And beginning with the challenge of learning to read, we work from developing those foundational skills, decoding, fluency, oral language, vocabulary, etc. And all professional development is anchored in that. So let's take a look then quickly at the expectations of this bill, side by side, what we do for Knox County. The requirements from the Tennessee Literacy Act, obviously, reading screener 3 times a year, and this would result in us providing reading interventions for students who might have deficiencies. Well, we've already do that and have been doing that for some time through the RTI Squared process. We provide reading interventions as a result of the screeners. One other piece that is a part of this law, and we don't know a lot about it, but I'm sure we'll receive more information soon, is that the screener could be a possible replacement for portfolio for grades pre-K to 2nd grade. This does not mean that we would be double assessing our students. We can continue with Ames Web, or we can decide to use the option that the state is developing, but you would not assess children twice in the fall, twice in the winter, and twice in the spring, which is good news. The Act also asks for home literacy reports, so you send progress reports home with parents. We already do that through RTI Squared. Parents are notified if their child is going to be in Tier 2 or Tier 3. They get the letter if there are characteristics of dyslexia as well. And then there's a foundational literacy skills plan that would have to be submitted to TDOE for approval. Well, we already do that by submitting the RTI Squared and the Say Dyslexia plan. So you can see we're in pretty good shape as far as those expectations. But what about professional development? As far as professional development, the Department of Ed is working to provide an online course that would be for 2 weeks. And anyone who supports students in the teaching of reading is free to take the course. I believe there will be a stipend for teachers. It is online, and he or she can take it at their leisure or whenever they have time. What the district has to do is just to approve professional development points for teachers who complete this. Well, I have a short list to the right of what we already do and have been doing for around 10 years now, and that's not only the reading course from pre-K to 5. Of course, we have pressed pause this year because of the pandemic, although we are providing 6 online review courses for some of our pre-K teachers. The CARE program and the FLIPS program are our systematic, explicit, foundational literacy curriculums, and we have those for K2 and 3-5. There are trainings offered all throughout the year. Sometimes a school will request. If not, we reach out to all new teachers. We also reach out to experienced teachers. Those are available both in person or asynchronously. We have a Canvas course, again, so that teachers can log in and take those trainings anytime they wish. District Learning Days, we are continuing, of course, doing this remotely as we have been doing in person in previous years, and of course teaching and learning. And these are just some of the ways that we've already been providing professional development on the foundational literacy piece, which we now know is much more comprehensive. Textbooks, obviously, is part of this. We know that they're requiring us to adopt a textbook that is approved by TDOE, and by that they mean highly qualified instructional materials, which means it aligns with the research and the Tennessee standards. Well, last year we had a team of 34 teachers who worked for an entire year. They even continued to work during the time that we were working remotely from home. They made a decision. I believe this board approved it. And now the district is working as best they can to try to make that purchase for this next school year. I think there's roughly $6 million, and we are not out of compliance unless we don't purchase by January 1st, 2023. So again, we're in pretty good position here. Now, Shannon's already mentioned that beginning in March, we've been focusing on prevention. You already know that all of the content areas worked with teachers, and each one created for kindergarten through 5th grade and as well as beyond, 60 different videos that our teachers created to use to help cover a lot of that loss from the spring and the summer. And we already have very clear, explicit foundational literacy instruction, obviously available in a very strong curriculum for care and flips. Teachers assess students regularly through reading and writing. And because of that, and because we spend so much time at the beginning of the year, in fact, we started working with teachers in July. We met with groups and teams of teachers, and one of their biggest concerns was making sure that at the beginning of the year they're listening to students read, getting a writing sample, finding out who knows letters, it sounds, etc. This is something that we've been working with them for many years, and they're very capable of doing so. We've also made a couple of purchases, an e-pocket chart, which is an online platform for teaching foundational skills for all K-2 teachers. Students can then work online and do practice and follow up. We have Reading Rangers, which is another online support for all virtual students in Tier 2 and Tier 3, as well as 24 schools that bought a site license. And then the reading department, my team of folks, we've all worked to create independent reading tasks that can be used both synchronously or asynchronously for K-5 for all of the units that they're teaching. And these aren't just independent tasks, they involve instruction as well as follow-up for the students. So that's just sort of a sneak peek into what we've been doing. So the question is, what does it mean to be a proficient reader or to read at grade level? Well, this slide is actually the mantra of the reading department. And I don't think in the last 10 years we've done a professional development with teachers, coaches, administrators, or anyone without including this slide. In fact, I've said to people the minute we take our eyes off of this slide is the day we need to walk away, because this is our end goal for all students. And if you think about it, reading with accuracy at an appropriate rate, which is conversational, reading with expression and prosody, that is what we see or know as that lower strand of the reading rate. But to be able to retell the text in your own words, to summarize it, to ask and answer questions, to be able to write in response, and most importantly, to be able to build that surface understanding to deep and then to transfer, that's that upper strand of the rope. So you can clearly see in our goal here, our mantra, both sides of what needs to be there. So how do we align with the with the Tennessee Literacy Success Act? Well, we've been working toward that for some time. And I believe we have teachers who recognize if there's a breakdown or a fray in a student's rote. And they're working diligently to develop proficient readers. Now we're going to hear the best part for last from two of our practitioners who are going to shed some light on the work that they've been doing this year, both in person and virtually. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Sexton. Do we have any questions for Ms. Sexton before she walks away? All right, great. Come on up.
Madam Chair, board members, and superintendent, my name is Jennifer Howard. I'm a kindergarten teacher at Powell Elementary School. Thank you for allowing me to speak today about my kindergarten classroom this year. I have 8 boys and 10 girls for a total of 18 students. Some of my students attended preschool, just like in previous years. Even though last year's preschool students had an interruption in their learning, I have not noticed that overall student skills upon entering kindergarten this year were lower than in previous years. We all know that with COVID-19, there have been some changes in the classroom regarding social distancing, wearing the masks, and not sharing materials. This has changed some of the routines and best practices that I've used in my classroom in previous years. I've had to adapt and change some activities and routines to keep my students safe and me as well. However, I've been able to maintain the same academic expectations. I use the KCS curriculum frameworks to plan my teaching, just as I have in previous school years. I still meet with all of my reading groups every day. It is a little more difficult to interact within the group because of the social distancing. However, I do feel the groups are very effective. Even though we began instruction 2 weeks later than we usually do, I am confident that I will get through all of the new learning that must take place before the end of the school year. We will probably miss some of the phonics review lessons at the end of the year. I have had students that have had to learn virtually due to exposure to COVID-19. My kindergarten grade level tries to stay yoked as much as possible. When my students have gone to the virtual teacher due to contact tracing, they learn the same skills that I'm teaching in my class. This consistency seems to be working very well for us. The teacher may have a different teaching style, but when the students come back to in-person instruction, they are able to adjust back to the classroom and apply the skills that they learned virtually. They also have ample time to practice these skills in differentiated center activities and small group instruction, like targeting reading, letter identification, letter sound correspondence, and writing. I also use many assessments to decide where learning loss may be occurring with students switching between virtual and in-person instruction. I use my daily data, such as my care work, quick writes, whole group questioning, anecdotal notes, and listening to the students read in my small group, as well as our Ames web data to determine whether my students are achieving in a comparable way to past groups and if learning loss is occurring for a particular student. When comparing my class this year to my previous classes, the academic performance is similar according to the data. There are students below grade level, however, this occurs every year, and I don't feel it is related to the pandemic. These students benefit from the targeted center activities and small group practice in the classroom. I am confident that my students will be academically ready for first grade next year. I am concerned, however, that they will lack some social skills due to social distancing. They are not working with partners or in groups due to social distancing. They are not accustomed to sharing materials. They sit next to the same students in class, lunch, walking in line, and special areas to limit contact tracing. While my students are academically comparable to past classes based on my observations and data, I don't know that they will understand how to share materials, work in groups or with partners, or even learn how to make new friends. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Howard. Ms. Babb, do you have a question?
Yeah, can I ask you something? Sorry. No, I really appreciate that, and I thought that was interesting at the end, you talking about sort of some of the social things. The question I have is, I was wondering, especially with like kindergartners, how the mask was affecting because they can't see your mouth moving and that kind of stuff. Have you seen that as a big problem, or how have you overcome that as a kindergarten teacher?
I overcome that with, I do not have my kids come to my carpet because of social distancing, so they're at their desk or their table. And so I'm able to be 6 feet away from them. So when I am teaching phonics, I can pull my mask down so they can see my mouth. When we talk about the positioning of our mouth for sounds and so forth.
Okay, thank you.
Good.
But it is a little hard to hear them with their masks on. I do agree.
Ms. Henderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually had the same question, so thank you for asking that, Ms. Babbs. I just wanted to, I don't have a question for you, I just wanted to thank you for coming today. You sound like an amazing teacher. I want my own kids to have you, even though they're too old. And thank you. Your kids are lucky to have you. Just wanted to say
I
thanks.
appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much. And I appreciate you sharing some of the concerns that you see, and that helps us as a board be able to hear those concerns as well. Thank you. Okay, Mrs. Buchanan?
Madam Chair, board members, superintendent, Good evening. My name is Nicole Buchanan, and I teach third grade virtually at Fountain City Elementary. To say that this has been a challenging year would be an understatement, but I have watched my students willingly take on these new challenges and grow significantly. This year, teachers knew that learning loss gaps would most likely be wider due to the extended school closure last spring, and filling these gaps depends on determining each student's academic needs. At the start of the year, I began to determine these student needs using a mix of both formal data from diagnostic testing, such as the Ames Web Plus Universal Screener, and informal data as well. Informally, I assessed my students' reading abilities and areas of need by meeting with them one-on-one through Microsoft Teams and listening to them read aloud to me. This allowed me to take anecdotal notes on their decoding abilities, accuracy, rate, and prosody or expression while reading. I used these notes in combination with the formal data I received to build small groups in reading. Within these small group meetings in Microsoft Teams, I'm able to target common reading needs and work to close learning gaps while still exposing all of my students to complex grade-level texts. Each day in whole group reading lessons, all students write in response to rigorous texts. We study words and word patterns to build decoding and comprehension skills. My students continue to read to me individually while I take anecdotal notes and give meaningful feedback to them in the moment. Through a platform called Seesaw, they write, they upload a photo of their writing, and they also record themselves reading it aloud to me. Ames Web winter testing indicated that 83% of my students are now performing above the 50th percentile overall based on national reading norms. In math, formal and informal data has also allowed me to determine areas of need for each of my students. For example, a program called iReady identifies very specific areas of need for students in math. Customized math lessons are created for students to complete during their asynchronous work time. In another program, Nearpod, my students can simultaneously solve a math problem during our synchronous lessons, showing their work in real time. All students are engaged in the task, and I'm able to provide feedback and guidance just as I would in the physical classroom. Ames Web testing in math this month indicated that almost all of my students increased their national percentile rank in math since the fall. While it has been a challenging year, I am still teaching my students the same grade level content using many of the same research-based practices, but I am learning new ways, finding new ways to deliver this instruction virtually. In education, collaboration is always necessary. However, in such an unusual year as this one, it has been even more critical. Our school has focused on finding ways to continue to collaborate safely and effectively. Fountain City uses teacher-led weekly PLC meetings to help us focus on meeting school-wide goals. This year, our school is working closely with NIET to increase student understanding of learning targets and success criteria in order to build student ownership of learning. I am the PLC leader for the third grade team. I work closely with instructional coaches and administration to explore research related to our focus and then share it with my teammates while facilitating our weekly virtual PLC meetings. We continue to prepare for implementing new strategies as we plan together weekly via Teams as well. Even in such a difficult year, each and every one of us has shared that our collaborative efforts have positively impacted student ownership this year. Also, as a lead teacher at our school, I am fortunate to see the benefits of collaboration in action in other classrooms beyond my grade level. Despite the pandemic, we are working to ensure that all students at our school are ready to learn, have the opportunity to learn, and are choosing to learn. One of the benefits of virtual learning that I have discovered is that parents who are working with their children as learning coaches at home each day have a better understanding of how complex teaching is how their child is performing as he or she works to meet third grade standards, and the expectations for learning, as well as the content that is being taught. Parents have also expressed an increased appreciation for teachers and all that we do to help students grow every day. At the start of this year, I was concerned about building a strong classroom family virtually. However, we have gotten to know one another and have built a safe learning environment where students feel enabled to take risks. We begin each day with a brief period of free talk time and a morning circle question. We share, we laugh, and we encourage one another every day. While there truly is no replacement for in-person instruction, I have learned and continue to learn new ways to implement good teaching virtually. I am in awe of all that my students have achieved. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we're in awe of you because we many of us have been looked over the shoulders of some virtual teachers, and I can't imagine how hard that is to do that all day, every day. So we are in awe of you, and so as you're speaking, you've obviously gathered lots of resources that you didn't start out the year having, so that's been time consuming, but I'm sure that's helped. And so do you think it's gotten slightly easier as your year has gone on, as you've become accustomed to teaching virtually?
Yes, I think that I have a better understanding of resources and how to use them appropriately, when to use them appropriately. I think my students, I can't express to you, they've just grown leaps and bounds. They use words like, I'm troubleshooting. I'll be right back in the meeting. I just have to troubleshoot. They just, they're little technology, experts. And so, yes, I do believe that it's getting easier. It's still a great deal of additional work hours, both during the work week and also on the weekends. The linking and putting everything together in a very explicit way for them. They still are third graders, so I want it to be very explicit so that they're going through their day, they know exactly what to do. So making videos and all of those things is very time consuming. But yes, I have a much better understanding of the resources available and how to get the best bang for my buck in a lot of ways.
Right, but it still takes a tremendous amount of time.
A tremendous amount of time.
Yeah. Okay. Do we have any questions, Ms. Fab?
I do have one question as a virtual teacher. And just because it's not like they're in the classroom with you, do you ever have trouble with the students not staying engaged or tuning out in a way that you can't because they're not in the classroom, getting their attention back? I would think that would be a little harder on the virtual.
I think a lot of it comes back to that solid expectation and setting. It's just like in the physical classroom, setting those expectations from the start. My students are very respectful and understanding of my expectations. And so we do have moments, of course, even when we're working at home, I only had one day where that occurred, and there's the temptation to, kind of do something else. And so I understand as third graders that that's definitely there, but having those firm expectations and also helping them to understand why those expectations are there and why it's important to do what they're doing has really helped. So.
Thank you. I truly appreciate every teacher, whether they're in classroom or in virtual or in person, but I know the virtual has just been such a huge leap for so many of our teachers, and we're so appreciative of what you're doing.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Mr. Watson?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So not a question, just a few comments. So one is I feel a little bit humbled and maybe a slight bit ashamed that this is School Board Appreciation Week when I think I'm really convinced that this should be Education Appreciation Year. You all and your whole team have really been killing it. And so, and I can say that too as the husband of a teacher and seeing what all you all are doing. So I really appreciate that. But a couple words that I want to point out is one is I really appreciate the intentionality. And I also really appreciate, Ms. Jackson, especially the proactivity and getting out way ahead of things. And also love that even in a year where the state of Tennessee has felt like, hey, we've really got to put a solid emphasis on this, especially around reading, that Knox County Schools has already been doing that, it sounds like, and really trying to help lead the way in that. So I really appreciate that, and also love that this soon after that legislative session, you all have been prepared to be able to come and share some of those impacts with us as a board. And also I know that we'll continue to learn more as the state rolls things out. But tonight has given me a lot of confidence that you guys are all up on it. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Thank you very much for coming. And I echo what Mr. Watson has said. I think it is very comforting we know you guys are working hard. It's comforting to have that reassurance that you're already doing what is being recommended. So thank you for your hard work. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any other questions or comments? Okay. With that, did you have another comment?
I have a question for Ms. Sexton, if you don't mind. As we hear the legislature talk and the concerns over everything revolves around this third grade proficiency, and I believe Knox County is at like 40%, is that correct? And what concerns me, and I've been in some public meetings, like I was at a community meeting where Mayor Jacobs came and spoke, and when he kind of gave those statistics, like the room gasped. I mean, like they just couldn't believe like we were 60% that weren't proficient. But what I guess I want to know is what is realistic? Because even when I've seen the numbers of like the states that are the best on proficiency, it's not hitting 95, 90%. And what is realistic? I mean, what is a realistic goal for us to be able to meet? And are there things that we are missing doing or that you feel that we're missing doing to get some of those kids to proficiency that are not there?
Whoa, that's as impactful as that 62-word sentence, isn't it?
Sorry, I packed a lot into that.
No, I really appreciate the question. You're right. In fact, the #1 state in the nation is Massachusetts.
Right.
And they only have typically between 50 to 51% of their third, fourth, or fifth graders who are proficient. So we're in fairly good company here. We're also looking at one end-of-the-year outcome test, which our REA department has done an excellent job in educating us to know that the point is, if I'm a teacher, I remember, I've taught pre-K to fifth grade, but when I got my scores, I was interested to see how my students performed among their peers in the building, how they performed across the district, and now we want to see how we perform across the state. And that's sometimes the end of it there. It would be almost impossible to say, but and I know Shannon has spoken to us a lot about this, you'd be hard-pressed to walk into any classroom unless I'm a newcomer to the country and find a child who can't read to you and talk to you a little bit about what they can read. The issue, as I tried to describe with the lower strands and the upper strands, the lower strands are considered constrained skills, and we can master those. You either know your letters and sounds or you don't. You can get a lot of words to automaticity, and we're not just talking sight words. You and I can't look at the word cat and not read the word cat, correct? The upper part of the rope is a lifetime endeavor. I'm still learning vocabulary. I'm still understanding verbal reasoning. I'm still building my literary skills as a reader. So that's lifelong. I think as long as we see progress and improvement, we're doing well, but I do think it's important to put it in perspective, like I said, from the #1 state in the nation. Now, does that mean I don't want to see all of our students proficient in reading? Of course I do, just like you do. But that's almost a question that's impossible to answer, because our kids can read when they take the T and Ready assessment. They just don't necessarily have the strength from that upper part of the rope, perhaps, to be able to answer some of the more complex questions and then to be able to write in response. But I'm extremely proud of our teachers and the professional development work that we've done. Every year they're more and more skilled, and they're just as concerned as well. And I've seen a lot of really exceptional teaching, both virtually and in person this year. So I wish I had a magic number that I could give you, sure, but it does put it in perspective. And you think about Massachusetts is a little bit different as far as demographics and colleges on every corner and so forth. But our kids are just as capable. But I really think that we're moving in the right direction to get there. But teaching someone to read is extremely complex. But excellent question. Did I avoid it enough, or did I walk
appreciate it.
circles around it?
Because I do think it's, I've heard, and we get that number of only 40% proficient, and it is like our community's shocked, and I think they think that 60% is illiterate, and I do think that they are.
And that's not true.
And that's where I think it's good for you to have the conversation with us, that we are better able to talk to the public about what that 60% really means. It's not they're illiterate when they're not proficient. And so that, I think what you talked about was very helpful, so thank you.
Yeah, and we appreciate your efforts in sharing and sending that message as well.
Yeah, great question. Great question, Ms. Babb. And if I'm not mistaken, Ms. Sexton, Knox County, I think a lot of it too factors into the size of our county. And isn't Knox County, don't we have the highest proficiency among the large counties? I think, that's worth pointing out. I believe that our proficiency is probably number one among the large districts.
Of the large districts, we do have typically the highest proficiency.
So even though we're not happy, we're like Ms. Sexton said, we always want higher, but just so that everybody understands that and knows that also, I think that's important to point out. Thank you. Mr. Watson?
I'm not sure who's best equipped to answer this, but it's really a follow-up to Ms. Babb's question, which I thought was tremendous. Kudos to you. Good question. But so all throughout the legislative session and before, there's a lot of emphasis from the state to saying, this is what we have to do. This is going to get us to the proficiency levels that we need, right? But what I just heard you all articulate very well is that for 10 years, around 10 years now, we've been trying to do those things, right? And doing those, it seems like, very well. And our proficiency is 40-something%. And so I'm not really fishing when I ask this question. I'm asking it authentically. I'm trying to discern what is it that the state is feeling is magic about this approach when there's a system like ours, and I know others too, who are doing these things but are not, I think the state in some ways like, hey, we're going to get 75% if we do this really well, but obviously that's not the case. So I don't know, I guess help me understand the disconnect that I'm feeling between that.
And of course, I have not had discussions with the legislators.
Sure.
We've been watching and keeping up with the discussions, and my understanding is, and on this part they're not wrong, early intervention is key to getting students on grade level. If we identify them early and we provide remediation, we have a better chance of getting students to grade level. So I think maybe the intent there is what they're going for, but I'm not sure that we have not yet had any guidance from the department on what this looks like and how to put it together for us to fully understand what they envision. So I think that is the key. That one of the things that we try to understand and work with our teachers will be the first ones to tell you this. Actually, students develop at different rates, sure. And part of what we have to do as teachers is understand that. With some students, it may take 25 exposures to a letter-sound combination for them to get it. For other students, especially a student with characteristics of dyslexia, it may take 125. So we have to have a little bit of patience around this too, and keep working with students, because they will eventually get it if they are given the right material. It just may not all be at the same time.
Is it fair to say that might be one of the concerns related to the emphasis on retaining third graders? Okay.
That is one of my concerns,
Yeah.
Around that emphasis on retaining third graders. And retention has not been shown to be an effective strategy for students. And my concern around that too is that it potentially leads to a higher number of student dropouts when they get into high school. So there's a long-term effect from that concerns me. Mm-hmm. Like I said, we are still looking for some guidance from TDOE to understand how to implement this. And I understand there are several strategies within the legislation that prevent a student from being retained. And we're going to be looking very closely at those to try to make sure that we give our students every opportunity to move on to the next grade level.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Thanks so much, Ms. Jackson and your team. Thank you all so much for being here. We really, really appreciate your insights. It's very helpful. Okay, Ms. Babb, can we move to public forum?
Sure. We have one speaker on public forum, Tanya Coates.
Good evening, Tanya Coates, Knox County, President of the Knox County Education Association. So first, I know I'm supposed to be talking about the superintendent's evaluation, but I need to say this first. In regards to the Board Appreciation Week, this is why it's very important to know that you're appreciated. You have been a listening ear to educators in Knox County and making sure that we're safe here. And knowing that you have experts here. My old boss just got up and, well, she's not old, but my former boss just walked out the door. That we know what's right for kids. And you taking the time to actually understand and learn more about what's going on within your districts. It's been a long time coming of getting a board that really is engaged instead of having 1 or 2 or 3 people engaged, but having the whole board engaged. And so we can say enough how appreciative we are of you taking your job seriously, because your livelihoods rely on 60,000 kids and over 10,000 employees. And it is very much appreciated to know that we are doing our jobs here in Knox County, and our kids are doing great. But it even feels even better when we have people that support us. So when I say that in regards to the superintendent's evaluation, I was going to say something that was not appropriate, so I had to rethink that. Because the way in which this board, I know we have done this for at least the last 7 years plus, going back and forth. Some of you hadn't been on the board prior to then. Going back and forth about a superintendent's evaluation, about if the teachers have to be evaluated, so should the superintendent. Well, we all know that we are doing our jobs because evidence is shown on a daily basis. When we have things like student data, if you were to take what you've just heard about students, their 3rd grade reading scores, and relying that on the superintendent's evaluation, you would say he was a failing superintendent. But we all know that he is trying to make sure that his administration, they're doing everything possible as it relates to making sure that our kids are meeting the mark. We have met the mark well above the state as in regards to student data. And we rely on a test that keeps being changed and altered. And it's been changed and altered for the last 7 years. At one time, we used to evaluate ourselves in the state of Tennessee, and then we started getting the race to the top funds. But I won't go there, just knowing that that is invalid sometimes when we're thinking about using this to evaluate a superintendent. When we think about evaluating on staff indicators or creating a positive culture, I know you have to use those goals into doing that. But you don't ever think about having the conversation with people that he comes in contact with. For instance, the Teachers Association. We have had a better relationship that is a working relationship to do what's best for all kids in Knox County than pinpointing disparities in education. There's a challenge across this nation about disparities in education. It's just not here in Knoxville. So I didn't want you to go back because this tool has been ever changing on a year-to-year basis. But it's unfortunate that we can't actually have accolades that our administration is doing the job that is set before them every year. Granted, we shouldn't wait to November just because we're waiting on test scores. But you should have some input, not just through surveys, but through what you see in your eyes. You have worked with superintendents on a day-to-day basis. You know what they do. And don't rely on some test scores that are not even valid or don't even prove that he has done what you've asked him to do. Or it could be she someday, but it won't be for another 20 years, I know. But we're just saying, sometimes you've got to actually have your input where it's for this board. And we hope that you would consider that when you're moving forward Because again, this instrument is the livelihood between a current administration and moving on to the next. Thank you. Oh, and lastly, I wanted to say, the effects of COVID are everlasting. It takes me a while to muster up to say something. I had COVID back in December. It's hard for me to come back and say something all the time. My throat feels, so just knowing that you have educators in this district have had COVID and they can't bounce back, but they're still doing their job and the superintendent still supports them. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Coates. That concludes public forum.
Thank you, Ms. Babb. Okay, do we have any comments for public forum from around the table? Ms. Bounds.
Hey, thank you. I was just going to add in relation to Mr. Watson's question that I think one thing we need to keep in mind, no matter how well-intended our legislators are, or the Department of Ed, or the Board of Education, the State Board of Ed, Ms. Janet Sexton is a reading practitioner who has devoted a lifetime to teaching children how to read and the skill of reading. And the same thing could be said of Ms. Jackson, but I think she dealt with older students than the younger. But I think that's sometimes where, as well intended as the legislature is to want that fix it, we're going to get to 75%, they're not practitioners of reading, and there is a big difference in someone that's a practitioner and has devoted a lifetime to that versus someone that's read an article. So that would be my consensus of what I think the difference is.
Thank you, Ms. Bounds. Ms. Satterfield?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to give a quick update and say thank you. Lonsdale community, they had the opportunity to give voice to what their color selection. So the kids got to pick and the parents they sent out the survey and they got a really high response. So I just want to say thank you for the efforts of including the community, ensuring that they're getting selection and choice. So they didn't pick the color that I wanted, but that's okay. That's okay.
So what'd they pick?
It's like this, it was like I wanted blue and green, but I think they picked blue and yellow. And so it's really nice. So I just want to just acknowledge that the efforts to include the community was there. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Anything else? Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Madam Chair, can I just say,
So sorry.
I had to jump in there. Wow.
So sorry.
My, you're efficient.
It's 6:39.
Got to jump out of my
Watch the
chair.
clock.
I just wanted to say, again, in light of School Appreciation Week, just how much I appreciate you, appreciate the board for giving me this opportunity to do what I do every day and to work with the people I work with every day. And you can see how great they are and how much they care and what hard workers they are. So it's just tremendous. And in your gift bag tonight, I don't know if you noticed, there's a photo, but there's a board photo. And we had to work really hard with that photo. Because we had to Photoshop. If you will look, Bernie Sanders has been showing up in all the photos here recently, so we had to Photoshop Bernie out. But look, he's dressed for tomorrow, and because of the weather. The weather tomorrow is going to be really, really cold, so we have a 2-hour delay tomorrow out of an abundance of caution, so that our bus drivers and inexperienced student drivers can see the roads, and if there are any patches of ice or anything like that, make sure that they can get to school safely. And if you would like your own personal board photograph with Bernie, if you'll let me know, I'll have that for you. So, thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Thomas. Good evening, everyone.